In your opinion, what is the most difficult subject to teach?
What? Can I use that not
I have pencils and pens over here if you need. Yes, the flags on them have my name.
That is clever.
Yes, I give primary pencils to 5th graders. They're really hard to break.
Dude, I didn't know this was a thing. I'm writing this thing.
Have a primary pencil with the name flag that I give. They're actually relatively cheap. I ordered them from Amazon. Yep. All right, I also passed out to you, besides a packet of handouts that we'll kind of go throughout, I give you your own mini scale. And you just take a look at that scale and then rate yourself. Where are you right now on this scale? Are you a 4 and you're like, sit down, Tiffany, you don't need to be doing this, let me do it. Or you can already implement the CER strategies in math, science, social studies. Or are you a 2? You know about CER, you haven't really implemented it in the content areas, maybe you've tried it out in reading and writing. Or 1, you're like, CER, huh? I don't know what that is. Another acronym.
Where is the scale?
Oh, you didn't get one? This is an idea I stole from a middle school teacher at a Monthly High School, or middle school. I saw it on Twitter, and I emailed him, I was like, ooh, I like that, send it to me. And it goes into our reflecting on learning piece, too. Kind of just rate yourself where you think you are. So, while you're doing that, those of you who responded to the Padlet question, in your opinion, what subject is the most difficult to teach? We have guided reading, social studies, math, writing, guided reading, math, and writing. Not gonna lie, I'm kind of surprised that it's like all over the board. And I know especially in the upper grades we're departmentalized, so we all have our strengths, and so like math might be pretty scary if you haven't taught it in a long time or ever. I always thought personally that writing was the most difficult to teach, especially in Collier County. More in the past few years, we've gotten a little more guidance as far as like a curriculum map and what the expectations are. And there always were optional trainings like on 6 trades and stuff, but they were optional and they were in the summer and we're busy. But you can do things throughout your day in all content areas that will strengthen your writing. And the CER strategy is one of them. I did some kind of sleuth work yesterday, and I went around and I talked to some different teams and kind of tried to get a feel of like where everybody was at with the CER strategy. And my understanding is that primary grades had a training from Sarah on CER in like reading and writing, right? But when they did that, the intermediate grades, we talked about benchmark data, the reading benchmark data at that PLC. So I'm going to kind of get the intermediate grades up to speed on what CER is really talk about how you can implement it in the content areas to work on writing in math, to work on writing in social studies and your other content areas to kind of build that foundation. They're writing about social studies and science now in writing anyway, to give you that foundational piece. Okay? So, in your handout, the first thing you have is some standards. So you can put that aside. And the next thing in your packet should be this CER kind of a graphic organizer. This is how I set, it's a half sheet, CER analytical writing. Maybe turning the light on.
Yeah.
Ah, thank you. You get comfortable to your own machine and then until like pour into it. Okay, so this is just a brief
Veronica
explanation.
Zaragoza, please call the front office. Veronica Zaragoza.
About what CER is. When you're doing the CER strategy, you're giving your kids a question or a writing prompt. And you're asking them to make a claim. And simply making a claim is just restating the prompt, restating the question, answering it in their own words. And I'm going to show you an example. Then they provide evidence to prove their answer. And we've been doing that for a few years. The text says, the author stated, okay, I read, your level of difficulty depending on your grade level. But the hardest thing is this reasoning. And that's what our kids don't incorporate into their writing. And we lose points because of that. Because they're not connecting it back. This proves my claim. This is why I said this. This is my evidence because. And so that's why the CR strategy is so powerful in reading and writing. But if we could pull it into our content areas too, they're getting just that much more practice using it. And when they get that writing prompt on the FSA in front of them, that's about why should people recycle or what have you, they've had that experience writing about it in science. The articles are about science or social studies topics. So just, you're building your writing throughout the day rather than just that writing block. Okay? All right. The graphic organizer I was talking about, this is how I first introduced my students to it. I have reluctant learners. I have 2 ESE clusters. I've got some high kids in there too. I kind of need to bridge that gap of what everybody can do. Okay? So that graphic organizer, what I taught them to do in writing was, before we started doing this in paragraph form, okay, let's write our question right here. What are we answering? Then we restated the question. Like I said, we started it in reading and writing. What's our evidence? Okay, according to the text, blah, blah, blah. They've been working on pulling evidence for a few years. Then the reasoning piece. And this is where they needed the most coaching. The reason this is, or because, or this proves, that kind of a language. And it's okay to give them sentence starters as you begin. The more they practice with it, the more they're going to have to get the hang of it. After we did this for a few weeks, then I said, okay, you know your CER strategy, you have it. Then I gave them the question, and I said, okay, write your answer. Make sure you have your claim, make sure you have your evidence, make sure you have your reasoning. And then they had to really well thought out paragraph. That could be a paragraph in any essay or any writing prompt that had those pieces and finally has that reasoning that's been lacking for years, at least in my classroom. It's the hardest thing for them. I already told you why. Well, I don't have to say it again, but they need to do that. It's kind of like the conclusion of the paragraph. Yes.
Or a lot of them want to give their opinion. I think that the main character was mean. Well, it doesn't talk about the main character being mean. Like it has to be specific to the evidence that you find. And I've only done it once in my class, but that was the part with the reasoning that they had the most difficulty with. Because they just wanted to throw thoughts out, but it didn't have to do with what they read.
Right. And sometimes when they get to that reasoning piece, they realize that their evidence doesn't connect to their claim. And that's hard.
Have you ever done this or tried this where you have them have their claim, of course, and then their reason behind their claim, and if you have your reasoning first, then you go back and find the evidence that goes with your reason, because they're really good at pulling out little facts, but they don't know why they chose those ones, and they don't really go together.
Yeah.
Does that work? Like, what is your reason behind your claim, and then find the evidence that fits with your reason?
Yes, I never have had them do it on their graphic organizer first, but I'm always pulling kids to my table and going through it. Okay, what's your claim? Restate your answer. Well, why did you choose? Like, I verbally do it, but that's a good idea. Good suggestion.
Because sometimes once we get to the reasoning, we have to go back and choose different evidence because it doesn't really go with your reason.
Definitely. Yeah. And just because, like, in 5th grade, just because there's one place for evidence and one place for reasoning doesn't mean you can't have more pieces of evidence, right? So this is just like a starting point for them. I needed to gradually move them from just pulling evidence to really thinking about it, being purposeful, and connecting that back with the reasoning, okay? So I gave you just something helpful that I gave my students in the beginning when we first started using evidence. Some sentence starters. They have this in their literacy notebook. They can go back to it. I find that a lot of times my ESC kids, my ELL kids, if I'm not giving them those each time, they need a reminder of it. So this is theirs. They can go back to it when they need to and use it. So that's just for you. Okay. So now that we've kind of talked about CER in reading and writing, and hopefully got everybody up to speed as to what CER is, let's talk about how you can use it in the content areas. And this is where that first page, the standards, it says implementing the CER strategy in the content areas at the top, comes into play. And when I was getting this together, it had been a while since I had looked at some different curriculum maps, and boy was I surprised at like the kinder curriculum map and what isn't on the science curriculum map anymore that used to be, and the math curriculum map was like so different than when I taught it years ago. But it's the same kind of thing in your content areas. And the most helpful thing to do is usually start with your essential question, if you're provided one, or the one that you create. And kind of teach kids to go through the same thing, the claim, the evidence, and the reasoning. You can monitor their comprehension, do a formative assessment, how are they doing compared to the standard in their notebooks using the CER strategy, and thus building your writing in your content areas. So let's look at this kindergarten standard. I gave you the learning goal and the score 3 content, and this curriculum map had an EQ already. The student will explain differences between wants and needs and be able to distinguish between goods and services. Explain the difference between wants and needs and distinguish between goods and services. Now you don't have to use the score 3 content. If that day your lesson is on the score 2 content, that's okay too. You're just going to tailor your question for that, okay? Now for the kinders, I kind of made a close activity for them. I wrote the sentences out, I left some blanks, and then they can fill it in. And guys, they're not going to be able to do it by themselves the first time. It's going to take a couple weeks of going through and modeling and stuff like this, but this is a start for them. So here's what they could write. We use money to buy goods and services. I use money to buy something I want, like toys. Let's see. Because, now here's where they distinguish the difference. Because toys are something I don't have to have. That's why it's a want. I use money to buy something I need, like food. Because everyone needs food to live. So you're getting them to answer those questions. You're getting them to show proficiency with your learning goal, but you're doing it in a writing way. Okay? Oh, math. Math was up there a couple of times. Oh, and by the way, I pulled learning goals at the end of quarter 3. So if you wanted to pull these and use them in your classroom, hopefully you probably haven't gotten to these standards yet, so they can be implemented. So here's fractions. Kind of scary. They can use comparison symbols, greater than, equal to, less than, to compare fractions with the numerator and the same numerator and the same denominator, and justify the comparisons using fraction models. So here you don't really have, and it's such a question, but you have a problem. They can solve it. They can draw their models. But then they use their CER strategy to talk about their reasoning. Okay? 4/5 is greater than 4/6 because when I drew my area model, 4/6 took up more of the whole, or 4 parts of the 6 took up more of the whole, or 4/5 took up more of the whole than 4/6 did. This proves that 4/5 is greater than 4/6. So you have that claim. They're using their model that they drew as their evidence. So this time you're not saying the text stated. And then they're pulling back that reasoning piece. Just kind of teaching them, always explain yourself. Tell why. It's so important in writing. Okay? 5th grade science. Students are able to investigate static electricity, which is an invisible force, with different materials to determine like charges and unlike charges. For example, rubbing a balloon to hair, 2 balloons, etc. And here's their question. How can I determine like and unlike charges of static electricity? So imagine you're in a 5th grade classroom. You've given the kids balloons, and they're rubbing them on their hair, right? They're investigating what's going to happen. Or they have a balloon hanging from the table, 2 balloons hanging from the table, and they're rubbing one with a felt fabric. Well, what's going to happen? They're going to see that when they only rub one balloon on their hair or the fabric, that the balloons are going to attract each other, because one now is positively charged and one's negatively charged. But if they rub both balloons, they're going to repel, because now they're both positively recharged, and maybe they'll connect back to that magnetism lesson that they had a year or 2 ago about opposites attract, and the same repels. They have their diagram drawn in their science notebook. Now they can answer that question and use the CER strategy. Okay? I can determine like and unlike charges of static electricity, which is an invisible force. When I rubbed the 2 balloons with felt, they repelled. This Two positive charges repel. So it's that same kind of a thing. That's saying, give me your claim. Restate the question, give me your answer. Tell me why. My model shows. In the experiment, this was the result. And then connecting it back. This is why. This proves. Why do you want to do it in the content areas? Because if we do it all day long, across all content areas, when they get that writing in front of them, they're going to be able to do it. As they move up through the grades, more and more is expected of providing reasoning, writing responses to questions like this. Any questions? I've been talking a lot. In your packet, you have something about science, a handout to kind of guide you as you're planning or teaching science. Talks about how to do a claim in science, evidence, and reasoning. Basically what I talked you through. The same thing with math. There's this little stoplight. How to make a claim in math. How to explain your answer. What steps did you take to solve? And how to connect your reasoning. Okay. On the back of your standards paper, and I'll give you lots of papers. It's this one. I gave you 3 standards to try. Can you use the CER strategy? How would you model this for your students? So it starts with social studies in 2nd grade, where the learning goal is to identify symbols, individuals, events, and documents that represent the United States. So go ahead and try it. How could you use the CER strategy? Social studies is probably the easiest one to start because it's so much similar to reading and writing. You can talk into a partner. And then the answer's up here. If you want to come take your device, scan the QR code up here. No, not every answer is going to be exactly the same, but it's going to be similar. So feel free to talk, work together, get up, check your answers. The math one's over here, and science back here.
You know, I'm just thinking from a kid's point of view,
question, but it's individuals. This is the whole list.
Oh, I forgot she was videotaping.
Well, I will put all of these on the share drive. And if you can please, in your own time, go back and rate yourself. What do you think your proficiency is now? Did you move up to a level 3? Do you still think I should sit down? And then, no rush, but on your own time, I gave you this 3-2-1 reflection activity. If you would just kind of write what you learned today, on the back, jot some notes about how you think my presentation was, and just give me some feedback. Don't write your name on it, just so that I'm always learning and growing as a professional, and hopefully moving into leadership roles that I can improve myself giving professional development.
Thank you.